The 7th episode of the 5th series is By George, the episode that gives George the Steamroller another major role since Steamroller from Series 4. But is it just as fun of an episode as Steamroller was? Let's take a look. George has been working with the little engines and is waiting for Percy to take him to a new workplace. George is insulting Rheneas and Skarloey when Percy arrives. When they leave, the two engines are pleased to see him go. Percy, however, is annoyed when George grumbles all the way to the old branch line which is being turned into a road. Percy is still fuming when he meets Thomas, who advises him to ignore George's rude remarks. George is enjoying himself as he tears up the old branch line when Thomas races by. George calls him to admire his work, but Thomas takes no notice. George feels insulted and yells at Thomas by calling him a useless blue puffball, but Thomas still does not hear. Seeing that he was ignored, George angrily vows to pay Thomas back. Upon reaching the crossing that intersects the unused railway with the active one, George deliberately tells the workmen to tarmac it, knowing that they have not properly finished it. Thomas soon runs through on the same line with a vegetable train. The signalman has forgotten to warn his driver about the tarmac crossing and has fallen asleep. Thomas sees the signal green and is delighted, thinking that they do not need to stop, but his driver sees the tarmac crossing and realises they do. However, it is too late and Thomas ends up derailing and crashes through a barn. The next day, Percy explains to Gordon what had happened with his experience with George, but the big engine takes no notice and claims that George will not cause any problems for him. Later on, George is working in the yard at Crosby Station when Duck arrives with a train of empty trucks. Unfortunately, George is blocking Duck's way, resulting in the last truck of his train to rest at the points on the main line. Despite Duck's demands, George deliberately refuses to move out of the way, which only angers Duck as well as his driver, who goes to complain to the station master only to find that the points and signal have already been set by the signalman to let Gordon pass. Before he could be alerted, Gordon, who is already in a hurry with the express, rushes through and hits the truck, causing it to launch into the air and smash into pieces upon hitting the ground, to Duck's horror. At the next station, Gordon is worried that the Fat Controller is going to be cross with him. The Fat Controller is indeed cross, but he notes that it was neither Gordon nor Duck's fault as he declares that whoever caused the disturbance will have him to answer to. And so a few days later, Thomas and Percy arrive to see George, who has been found out by the Fat Controller and punished by being sent to saw wood at a timber yard for an entire week, leaving him feeling miserable. Despite the fact that Thomas jokes that George would be just as rude as before once his punishment is over, George spots a smile that shows he may not. This was George the Steamroller's first major appearance since the Series 4 episode Steamroller, and I think it works as a pretty good sequel to the episode, showing what happened to George sometime after the events of his first appearance. And his insult to Thomas is an insult that would later be used by Diesel 10 in the movie Thomas and the Magic Railroad.
George felt insulted. "You're a useless blue puffball," he shouted.
Aha! There's the blue puffball!
Whether it was intentional or not, this is very interesting foreshadowing to Diesel 10 in Thomas and the Magic Railroad. And the storyboard depicted that after Thomas crashed through the barn, he was to end up in a muddy river across from a cow field. For unknown reasons, the muddy river was later cut prior to filming. And I loved the scene with George causing problems with Duck and Gordon so much that I actually adapted it for one of my TTT episodes, having George switched out for Devious Diesel causing the problems. I just thought it would be a good way to mix in that one scene with the Diesel Does It Again storyline, and I'm still quite happy with the results I got. This is another episode that I always loved watching as a kid, and watching it again today I love it even more, as it's another one of those episodes that focuses on a road vehicle mostly rather than other characters for the TV series. And it really works as a sequel to George's last story. It also marked his last speaking and leading role. It's also the first of a trope where signalmen fall asleep during the events of an episode. And I love that little detail of Duke's portrait being inside the signal box. Just another great callback to the 4th series and the well-loved character. And much like the scene of Gordon crashing through the station in a better view for Gordon, it's really amazing seeing the several takes they took of Gordon's accident with the truck in this episode. Just the amount of different shots they took until they found out which one was the best one to use for the episode. Another fun episode about everybody's favourite steamroller, By George, is definitely an episode that's worth watching all these years later. You'll definitely get lots of fun watching this character make his triumphant return since the 4th series. It's an episode that's definitely not to be missed if you love Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends and George the Steamroller. It's easily among one of the most entertaining.